So good afternoon and welcome. Did anybody hear that noise? Anybody know what it is? Sputnik, exactly. We thought we'd do that as a way to introduce the afternoon. So my name is David Radcliffe. I'm the Kamyar Haghighi head of the School of Engineering Education. And what we're here to do is to have the inaugural Interdisciplinary Engineering Colloquium. Interdisciplinary engineering is one of the founding elements in the School of Engineering Education, and it allows students to do engineering in disciplines that don't yet exist. It started in 1969. Also in the first year program which we run, we stress interdisciplinary teamwork, and our PhD in engineering education is by its very nature interdisciplinary. So we just thought this would be a chance to bring those threads together, and our idea of 3 visions, 1 program, and to have a conversation around a topical issue. In this case, the 50th anniversary of human spaceflight, bringing together perspectives from engineering, the humanities, social sciences and so forth. I'm really pleased that this is being co-hosted by the College of Engineering and the College of Liberal Arts. I want to recognise Dean Advisor, who's down here. Dean Jameson can't be here today, and Claude Kokini is from the offices here. And also Professor Phil Wonkert, who is somewhere. There he is, who is the head of the Interdisciplinary Engineering program. And what a great venue here to be in Armstrong Hall with the replica of the Apollo 1, where we remember the loss of life of the first Purdue astronaut, Gus Grissom, along with Roger Chaffee, who from Purdue, and Ed White on the launch pad in 1967. So we want to look at the history, the 50th anniversary of human spaceflight from the perspective of it takes a team. Purdue's rightly proud of all the astronauts from here, 22. What we want to do today, I apologise. I meant also to recognise the President of Cordova. I apologise. We wanted to metaphorically pull the curtain back and see what's behind the scenes in getting these astronauts into space. And so it's said often that something like 400,000 people were involved in getting 3 people to the moon and back. Some people say the figure's more like 3 million were involved. Either way, it's a large number, and it takes both engineering vision, political courage, a unity of national purpose, to embark on this adventure of human spaceflight. So this afternoon we're going to look at this great technological achievement from those perspectives of the social, political and historical as well as the technical, at least briefly. On your chairs you would have noticed, I hope, if you haven't thrown it, a piece of note paper and a pencil. What we're going to do is ask you to write questions as we go, and we'll gather them up and we'll have a Q&A at the end. What I want to do now is to set the scene before we ask the first speaker to speak, and we're going to show a short video which takes us back to 1961, the year when the first 4 individuals, Yuri Gagarin from the Soviet Union, Alan Shepard from the US, Gus Grissom, and then German Titov from the Soviet Union flew. And as you look at the video, and this will show some of the political background of the time, some of the competition, but also shows some of the team. And look out especially for Sergei Korolev, who was the Soviet designer, often hidden away from the public. He's the equivalent of Werner von Braun in this country. And you'll see him in his black hat and coat. So with that, I'll invite you to look at the monitors as we take ourselves back to 1961 to get a sense of what it was like 50 years ago. Thank you.
Gagarin circled the Earth once, then landed on the plains of southern Russia. Away from the limelight, Korolev inspected his capsule. Moscow prepared to greet a hero.
The reaction of the Muscovites was much bigger than the launch of the first satellite, it was real proudness of all the people. It was filled with the people. People were everywhere, in the balcons, in the windows, on the roofs of the even multi-story buildings. They're sitting everywhere looking for this first man in the world. It's possible to compare the celebration with the victory in the Second World War.
The next day, inside his Moscow compound, Korolev staged a celebration for his secret workforce and the man he'd made a hero.
Comrades, I would like to express my deep gratitude for your wonderful work. I think we'll see many more space flights thanks to your intellect, your golden hands, and your remarkable innovation.
3 weeks after Gagarin's flight, on May 5th, Alan Shepard became the second man and the first American into space. Inspired by the success of Shepard's flight and desperate to one-up the Russians, President Kennedy charted a new course for NASA.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
On July 21st, 1961, at 7:20 a.m., the Mercury Redstone rocket, filled with 18 tons of fuel, launched Liberty Bell 7 and Gus Grissom toward space.
Roger, this is Liberty Bell 7. The clock is operating. Okay, it's a nice ride up to now. Roger. Okay, the fuel is go, about 1 1/4 Gs. Cabin pressure is just coming off the pitch. The oxygen is go. We're at 26 amps.
Newspaper headlines tell the story. German Titov of Russia returns to Earth after orbiting the globe 17 times in a little more than 25 hours, covering 435,000 miles, which is more than twice the distance from the Earth to the Moon. An orbit by a U.S. astronaut is planned later this year.
So a lot happened in 4 months in 1961. I want to introduce our first speaker, Michael Smith, who's an associate professor in Purdue's Department of History. Michael teaches courses in the history of the space race, history of aviation, the history of Russia. He's currently finishing a book manuscript entitled Rocket Science and the Russian Revolution. He'll provide us with a perspective on the space race in those times in which we saw the public and the Soviet Union and the US supporting flight and the excitement that was going on, and how this affected people in those days. So it's the socio-political part of the team, if you will, and it also demonstrates how technocrats require the perspective of history and other social science and humanities people to understand and put in greater context. I'll invite Michael to the stage.
Thanks to Professor Radcliffe and the School of Engineering Education for inviting me, for hosting this event. I'm happy to represent the College of Liberal Arts. I've actually been a regular at some of the Purdue Spring Space Forums. They're organized by our engineers and a very fine group on campus, the Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. And I'll be honest and say one of the highlights of my career has been to speak before an audience that included Bill Nye, the science guy. He was the only person in the audience taking notes. Yuri Gagarin, 12 April 1961, just about 50 years ago. If that beep of Sputnik we just heard launched the space race, Gagarin's expression, you see it there in Russian, "Поехали," launched him and us, humanity, into outer space on an R-7 heavy booster rocket. Here's part of the official news announcement from TASS introducing the, quote, pilot cosmonaut, Yuri Gagarin, a citizen of the Soviet Union, and his Sputnik Vostok capsule, as it was called, followed by his exclamation.
Пилотом-космонавтом космического корабля «Спутника Восток» является гражданин Союза Советских Социалистических Республик, летчик майор Гагарин Юрий Алексеевич.
So you just heard it. It's a common enough expression in Russian. It can mean we're off, as you see, let's get out of here. And the commonness of it helped endear him to the Russian people. Right? The video clip, which we just saw, like the newspaper headlines of the era, like the history books that came after, reveals just how handily the Soviets won the race to space in 1961. Yuri Gagarin's flight into Earth orbit was the signal global event of that year, especially for the Soviet Union, which seemed to leap into the prominence for technical scientific superiority. He was the star of Red Square. You see him here atop Lenin's tomb with Premier Nikita Khrushchev. He was Khrushchev's protege as long as Khrushchev was in power, and became a true, genuine hero of the Soviet Union. Gagarin did. He was the star of propaganda. Here you see him as the son of the Communist Party. Glory to him. All hail to Gagarin's manliness, his labor, his intelligence, with that globe in the background. He was the star of the Warsaw Pact and of the Global Alliance of Communism as well, not an insignificant factor in the Cold War. You see Soviet allies there within the outline of that dove of peace. Right? He was the star of the American media, too. He made the cover of Life, made the cover of Time, made the cover of US News and World Report, which as a rule didn't have any pictures on its covers. In a way, this was the double bind of the space race. We not only had to watch Soviet space spectaculars from afar, we had to endure the humiliation of them coming to our own shores. Soviet firsts sold in America, as you can see from the covers themselves. I'm especially glad the introductory clip showed us Sergei Korolev and his teams of engineers and mechanics who celebrated Gagarin's flight. Here they are together, Gagarin and Korolev. It's quite remarkable that either of them could have been killed in their youth or young adulthood. Gagarin was only 7 years old when the Germans invaded. He endured the occupation, lived in earthen dugouts, ate just scraps of food. Him and his brother nearly executed. Korolev himself, at the age of 31 in 1938, endured a year and a half of arrest, interrogation, torture, imprisonment, hard labor in the Kolyma gold mines of the Far East. It nearly broke him, both physically and emotionally. It's also remarkable how Korolev and his teams of engineers and mechanics shaped the Soviet space program. He was a great manager of people and things, a master chief designer, systems engineer, and politician too. He was responsible in turn, and often at the same time, for the Soviet programs to create an intercontinental ballistic missile, an Earth satellite, piloted spacecraft, communication satellites, and the yearly moon program as well. He was ultimately responsible for other essentials of people's lives: worker housing, food supplies, entertainment, special prizes and vacations. He made things happen, lionized as one who, in a proverb, could kick open Khrushchev's door with his foot. In Vostok, he worked with several other chief designers to coordinate engine controls, flight mechanics, orbital trajectories, radio communications. He directly managed his own teams to create fail-safe, redundant systems in the Vostok capsule, all to protect his cosmonaut wards. 56 electric motors, 241 vacuum tubes, 800 relays and switches, 6,000 transistors, all interconnected by 15 kilometers of cable. That takes a lot of team. The next slide might scare you a bit. It shows the Soviet bureaucracy for the space program. It's meant to intimidate you, in a sense, to show how grand and complicated it was. But Korolyov's chief design bureau is there in the highlighted black. Right? His main office is just north of Moscow at Kaliningrad. And he had this special power of vertical and horizontal reach right in the middle of things. No one else had it. Right? So as overwhelming and even Byzantine the system could be, with the political bureau of the Communist Party at the top, and all kinds of managers above him, political commissars, engineers, apparatchiks, he still got things done. All of this dramatically confirms how spaceflight science and engineering were so intertwined with the politics of the Cold War, how science and engineering were displayed and transformed by the media, aligned with shifting popular beliefs and doubts. Matched with Gagarin's nearly one orbit of Earth and Titov's 17 orbits, America's answers seemed rather modest indeed. Right? Alan Shepard's suborbital flight for some 15 minutes on a Werner von Braun Redstone rocket. He made the headlines and magazine covers too. There he is on the cover of Life. He made the cover of Time. He didn't make the cover of Newsweek, as you can see. Caroline Kennedy did. He had a very fine feature article inside, but I need not explain why he didn't make the front cover. Too much of a draw there. Right? Gus Grissom, Purdue's own, and a star of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, all made no magazine covers, at least no major ones. This after the accidental and much exaggerated sinking of his capsule into the ocean. And this is only 1961. Gagarin was the capital first among such other Soviet firsts between 1957 and 1965 as the first intercontinental ballistic missile, the first object to hit the moon, the first photographs of the dark side of the moon, the first satellite into Earth orbit, the first animal in space, the dog Laika, the first person to space, the first woman to space, the first spacewalk. And by the way, the Soviets launched these and most other payloads to space since on the famous R-7 heavy booster rocket, which was retooled and perfected as Soyuz, the very same Soyuz booster that will soon launch American astronauts and Russian cosmonauts to the International Space Station. And yet to dwell on the drumbeat of Soviet successes does no justice to the history or to the people. We need a more meaningful breadth of coverage, drawing out the perspective that can tell us from our present vantage point, for example, the early 1960s were really the peak moment in the rise and fall of the Soviet Union. I would propose, in fact, that in terms of genuine popularity and political legitimacy, the USSR reached its zenith on 12 April, Gagarin's flight. Within 2 decades, Soviet living standards plummeted. Within 3 decades, the Soviet Union collapsed. The political system that sponsored all those firsts imploded. And through all of this, even Yuri Gagarin came to be the object of the infamous Soviet joke. I will offer only 2. Take the joke about how, after so many Soviet Jews fled the country in the 70s and 80s for America and Israel, they launched a campaign to build a monument to Yuri Gagarin in Tel Aviv. After all, Gagarin was the first person who yelled, "Let's get out of here. Поехали." Or take the joke of the Communist Party hack who admitted, I'm most proud of two of our Soviet heroes. First, Comrade Yuri Gagarin, and second, Comrade Isaac Newton. Gagarin tried to get out of here, right, meaning the USSR, by flying into orbit. Newton proved that he would inevitably be forced back. Try, but you can never leave. The wider perspective that I'm proposing also tells us that the suborbital and orbital flights of Mercury were but an initial test of American capabilities in space, a prelude to the docking and rendezvous missions of Gemini, to the 6 missions to and from the moon of Apollo. These amounted to such remarkable and unmatched series of accomplishments, 3 very different programs in just over 10 years, 1961 to 1972. They were, in fact, a prelude and preparation for all of the space shuttle's achievements, including the building of the International Space Station, all between 1981 and 2011, another 30 years of unmatched space achievements. Neil Armstrong perhaps said it best in an address he delivered on the 40th anniversary of Apollo 11. The space race, he cautioned, was not a simple race, but a series of heats, something like a triathlon. Granted, the Soviets won, quote, heat after heat at the beginning, but America kept pace, leading to subsequent achievements in Gemini, a whole series of American firsts, and leading to what Armstrong called, quote, the apex of the space race, Apollo and the moon. Armstrong said something else very interesting in his talk. This in the context of the sometimes frustrating and frenzied rivalry between the Soviet Union and America. Here's what he said. History is a sequence of random events and unpredictable choices. As shocking as the insight might sound at first, it really is quite appropriate. And I thought I'd test Armstrong's hypothesis with a little research of my own. So I picked a random date in history, 10 November, right, today, and I looked back exactly 50 years to see what was happening in our world. I accidentally proved Armstrong's first point about random events when I went back 1 year too many, to 1960, right? Actually, 10 November 1960 turned out to be a much more interesting date. It was a Wednesday. It was a Wednesday, and the newspapers were filled with John F. Kennedy's election to the presidency. It was a paper-thin victory, according to the news, by a margin of 2 votes per voting precinct. 300,000 votes margin out of the 66 million cast. The results weren't even final, but former President Eisenhower sent his congratulations, Nikita Khrushchev sent his congratulations, and even Richard Nixon, the defeated Richard Nixon, sent his congratulations. So remembering Armstrong's proposition that history is a sequence of random events, what else happened on 10 November 1960? Well, Mickey Mantle lost the American League Baseball Most Valuable Player by 3 votes to Roger Maris. Willie B., a gorilla, a real gorilla, received 300-some votes as a write-in candidate to Georgia's 5th congressional district. He was a Democrat, by the way. The Colts kept their lead in total offense. Unfortunately, it was the Baltimore Colts. Worse yet, it was Johnny Unitas at the helm. Right. Cotton advanced 15 cents to $2.10 a barrel. Right. And an interesting few sentences at the very back of the New York Times. NASA announced another delay in an unmanned Mercury spacecraft. Right. It's telling that in the flood of news reports about the election, amid so many random distractions, Americans were reminded in a whisper of falling behind the Soviets in the race to space. Of course, John F. Kennedy's election changed it all, changed everything. It began 51 years ago today. And his election proves Armstrong's second point about unpredictable choices. President Kennedy, in this photograph at a joint session of Congress, announced the Apollo program to the moon on 25 May 1961. just after Shepard's flight, before Grissom's, well before Mercury had really even begun in earnest, before Glenn had flown in orbit, before Project Gemini had even been conceived or designed. The Apollo decision to go to the moon teaches us that depth of historical coverage matters as much as breadth. President Kennedy's decision, in fact, was tangled in deep Cold War politics. Gagarin's successful flight on 12 April and a Soviet success in space, the Bay of Pigs disaster in Cuba just a few days later, and an American debacle here on Earth. Both forced the president's hand. As he said, America needed, quote, dramatic results. And so he called for, quote, landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. Reading the newspapers and magazines of the day, it's really quite amazing how his Apollo decision captivated the public, overpowering even stories about Mercury and Gemini at that very moment. Kennedy's politics made the moon a prize, and NASA teams of engineers and contractors delivered. Again, not meant to scare you too much here, but a point of comparison with that top-heavy, complex Soviet bureaucracy. NASA had something much more efficient in an interesting way that fulfilled Kennedy's call to the dream. Right there in the very center, in the Office of Manned Programs, the Apollo Program Office, it had Samuel Phillips, who helped mastermind the Minuteman missile program. And it had an efficient bureaucrat who demanded from the very center of this thick, complex bureaucracy of its own attention to detail and attention to the mission. All of those contractors, North American alone receiving $6 billion. There are those 400-some thousand contractors Professor Radcliffe mentioned. So Korolev at the center of his bureaucracy, so long as he lived, he could move things. We had our own strengths at the very center of ours. To conclude, this combination of breadth and depth of perspective teaches us that the space race, though it's a fact of history, ought not to overwhelm our analysis and our judgments. The space race was about political competition, about media flashes of brilliance, of achievement, of presumed failure. It was about firsts. But firsts are more about quantity than quality. We ought to concede that the Soviets won the race to space. Conceded in part because it's true, and concede in part because it doesn't really matter. America always answered with achievements of its own, achievements of focus, of talent, of quality. I don't propose a chauvinism here or a suprematism. These are not questions of their inferiority and our superiority. They're questions of difference, of eloquent difference. Difference that didn't always divide, but could also unite. Take the case of Apollo-Soyuz in 1975, when we rendezvoused and docked in the Apollo and Soyuz programs. Take the case after the Cold War of the space shuttle helping to revive the Mir space station, and indeed all of the Russian space program. Take the case of how the Russian Soyuz rocket, even now, will provide American astronauts access to space and to the International Space Station. All of this tells us that in the end, we always find ways to work as teams. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. We'll now have another video segue to take us from 1961, the beginning, through to this year, 2011, through the shuttle program. And as an interesting random event in history, because of the delay in the landing of the last shuttle, it actually landed on the 50th anniversary of Gus Grissom flying, 21st of July. So look at this video and you'll see some Purdue supporters from in the video getting very excited.
For the thousands coming to view the launch, the troubles began early this morning. The roads leading to the Space Center were jammed hours before the scheduled liftoff. A trip that normally takes 15 minutes took almost 3 hours.
It was the second time around, but there was no feeling of anticlimax around the Cape this morning. The shuttle had become a symbol. Everyone waiting for liftoff had a personal interest in seeing it go up.
Well, I'd like to be an astronaut, but you know, it takes a lot of courage, and I'd be scared to go up there right now.
Anybody can see it on TV, but I got the chance to be here live, so I really see it live.
And I've seen more launches than anybody else here, and everyone is just as exciting, but this means more to me than any other, I think.
It was a carnival, a show that will have one run only. But it was more than that. These people were here because they believe in the shuttle, and they wanted to show it.
A few seconds away from switching to the redundant sense sequencer. T-minus 27 seconds. We have gone for redundant set sequencer start. T-minus 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15, 14, 13, T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4.
I can't tell you what a tribute that is to the American working man and the American working woman, too. You can't imagine the variety of people who worked on this vehicle, from all walks of life, all capabilities and limitations. It's all due to their individual efforts. They proved that they can do the job. They proved it for the world to see. And I'm mighty proud to be associated with folks like that.
In 24 missions, flown over 20 years, Endeavour has logged more than 103 million miles in space. The last of NASA's shuttles to be built, Endeavour prepares for her final flight, STS-134. Endeavour's 6 astronauts have trained for this mission for years. Well before any shuttle reaches the launch pad, however, a staggering amount of work is required. The parts, plans, and people necessary to make each launch span the entire nation.
You've got all these people, all these folks that are in their 20s, some of them in their 30s, and they are, no kidding, in charge of some part of the space shuttle, some part of the space station, or some part of the plan. And every one of those people absolutely believes that they are the one that makes the difference on getting those astronauts back down to the ground alive.
So that's brought us forward to the present time, and one little piece of trivia. The person speaking earlier on praising the men and women who created the shuttle is John Young. And the trivia is John Young flew on the first Gemini capsule with Gus Grissom, and Gus was the first person to travel to space twice. And so it gives us a direct linkage from the very early days all the way through to the beginning of the shuttle. So following on from that, the next speaker is Gary Horlacher, who's a NASA flight director. He's a 1989 graduate from the Interdisciplinary Engineering program here at Purdue with a major in system engineering. He served as a flight director for Endeavour's final mission this past May. He's supported 82 shuttle missions and mission control in his career at NASA, and he's currently training to become a space station flight director, as well as a commercial crew, at NASA. He's going to provide us the insights about the technical side of the teamwork that's required to get very complex systems into space and keep them there and bring them back safely. So very much the engineering team part of the equation. So please welcome Gary Horlacher.
Okay, well, thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks, David, for including me. You say I left here in '89, went down to Houston, young engineer with no idea what I was going to end up contributing to the program and the agency, and here I stand before you as a flight director, so who would have known? So anyway, it takes a team, and as David said, I'm going to give you some of the background of some of the teamwork it takes to get a shuttle prepared to fly into space, execute a mission, and get it back down. So since I can do all that, if I can do a clicker, we'll be in good shape. All right. So as you already heard, space exploration started as a race between two rival nations, but it has evolved into an international collaboration of teamwork. Human exploration from Apollo through shuttle to the International Space Station has produced unbelievable hardware and software, but that's not what has made us successful. It is the people that truly make spaceflight successful. These are people with dreams, imagination, integrity, ingenuity, dedication, and commitment. These are people that design, test, launch, land, and operate the space systems. So successful human spaceflight depends on an end-to-end chain of people, from the astronauts to the mission control folks, to the program, to the engineers, the contractors, suppliers, vendors. The entire chain makes this possible. Now, NASA was created as, and still remains, a federal agency. So any significant undertaking requires both planning and resources. So for NASA, the planning comes from National Space Policy, which is basically legislation or law. And then the high-level resources is, of course, budget. So both those are required to get us off the ground. Both those are also controlled by our national leadership, the President's administration, as well as Congress. Now, they are the two top key members in making human spaceflight possible. Without them, we don't leave the ground. Now, although they're not responsible for conquering the challenges and the technical challenges of putting people into space, they are the key team members in making sure that we are enabled to get to space. And we did an incredible job responding to the shock of Sputnik and the Cold War space race to the moon. Then we spent a couple years experimenting with our own first space station called Skylab, which we utilized some of the leftover Apollo hardware. And then we entered into the space shuttle era. Space shuttle was the first ever reusable winged spacecraft. It had tremendous cargo capability, which is perfect for building large structures in space, like space stations. It was also a huge, huge leap in technological advancement in many, many different disciplines, especially pushing the envelope in so many different ways. It certainly took a large team to design, develop, and test the shuttle. But today I'm going to focus on what it takes to get the plan, train, and fly aspects of a mission off the ground and completed, because that's what I've dedicated the bulk of my career to. Now, Space Shuttle is an American workhorse for approximately 30 years. The first 2/3 or so of the program was dedicated to a wide range of different objectives. Satellite and payload deploys, satellite retrieve, repair, and redeploy, most notably the Hubble repair missions, satellite retrieval and return back to Earth, as well as all kinds of scientific studies, technology demonstrations, and advancements. About the last third of the program was dedicated to the assembly and construction of the International Space Station, which we completed earlier this summer. Now, the shuttle was designed to spend approximately 2 weeks in space before returning back to a runway, and every minute in space is incredibly valuable, so we want to make sure we got maximum return on our investment. So I'm going to describe the plan and train parts of the mission preparation, and then talk about the teamwork required to accomplish the on-orbit and actual flight and bring them back home. So a couple years before a mission flies, the programs can pull together a long list of requirements for that specific mission. They basically get a handful of big ticket requirements, and it can get down to tens to even 100 low-level requirements, and they have to prioritize all those and set them up for us to go try to figure out a way to execute it. Now, the program will also work with all the customers to verify that their hardware, software, payloads, or experiments, whatever they're going to be putting up into space, is on a path and going to be ready to go at launch time. So about a year prior to flight, the mission operations team, which encompasses the flight controllers, flight directors like myself, will take those requirements and we'll build a flight plan that'll best accomplish all or as many of those requirements as possible in the most efficient manner with the time we have available. This requires a tremendous amount of integration across all the stakeholders and a lot of iteration. In other words, teamwork. The flight plan, I'll show you one page of a flight plan there, is simply just a timeline that captures everything each crew member is going to do from the time they get to orbit to the time they're going to do the deal burn and come back home. And you see it's taken down basically to about 5-minute blocks of granularity. So again, every minute in space is incredibly precious. Now, shortly thereafter, the specific astronauts will be assigned to that mission and become part of the mission-specific team. Here you can see the crew of the last Endeavour flight. And there's actually one Boilermaker in that mix, if anybody could tell. It would be the second from the right, Drew Feustel. And he actually was on the last Hubble repair mission as well. So about 6 months prior to the mission operations will go ahead and we'll baseline the flight plan, the procedures and the flight rules that we have in place to go accomplish the mission that the program's laid in front of us. So now we got a plan on paper. It's time to test it to make sure it's actually going to work. So about 4 months prior to flight, we start the integrated simulations. This is where we go ahead and put the crew in the shuttle simulators. You see them on the left side. And then we'll put the flight control team in mission control. We'll hook the facilities together and we'll run a set of time, 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours, and it'll look just like a real mission. If you didn't know, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And so at this point, in the background, there's an incredibly critical team called the training team. And they're going to go ahead and test us and see if we put together a good plan. And they're going to find out where our weaknesses are. So they study our plan, look for the weaknesses, and then they'll build a script of malfunctions that they will insert into the sims and watch how the flight control team and the crew responds to those, works around them, and solves them. And this type of training, more often than not, results in us adjusting our plan to make it even better. So by the time we go to fly, we've done probably about 10 of these types of simulations, sometimes more depending on the mission, and we've got an incredibly well-potted plan. We're ready to go to orbit. Now the training team is also responsible for training both astronauts and flight controllers to become certified to fly the shuttle. This is in a generic sense before they get assigned a specific mission. So it takes many, many hours of training in manuals, standalone mini simulations, and these integrated simulations to get to a point where you are certified to work with the space shuttle system. Now, the next team I'd like to mention is the extravehicular activity team. And these are the folks that put together the plans to go off and do all our spacewalks. So many missions require the crew to go outside and accomplish some of the tasks outside the comfort of the pressurized part of the spacecraft. So the EVA folks will go ahead and pull together a similar timeline to accomplish those tasks. Outside the spacecraft, they'll put together procedures and the flight plan as well to make that happen. And again, it's time to test that. So to do that, we go ahead and we'll take the crew and go ahead and squeeze them into their couple 100-pound spacesuits, and then we'll lower them into the water in what we call the neutral buoyancy lab. This is our weightless environment training facility. So once they get in the water, you adjust the suits such that they won't sink and they won't float, so they'll be neutrally buoyant, and that's the closest we can get on Earth to working in zero gravity in space. So as you can imagine, here's just another shot of the facility from the long end. So it may not look like it's that much bigger than an Olympic-sized swimming pool, but it's incredibly deep. Deep to hold all the mock-ups of the core section of the space station as well as the cargo bay of the space shuttle. And as far as I know, it still remains the largest swimming pool on the planet. So they'll go ahead and we'll squeeze the crew members. If you look on the left side, gymnastic skills are beneficial at this time to get into the suits. And once they're in the suit, you can see they generally start smiling. And then we'll get them all suited up, buttoned up in their own little, it's actually their own little spacecraft, if you will, and then lower them down in the water and cut them loose. Now, as you can imagine, mobility in these suits is very limited. So we have a team of divers that will actually help drive them around the pool as they go off and they work through their specific tasks that they're going to have to accomplish when we put them into space. Many, many hours are spent in this facility to make sure that this small slice of the entire mission is perfected as best we can on the ground, so we're ready for anything that surprises us once we get up into orbit. Now, this facility is also beneficial to give them some of their survival training. The shuttle spends a quick time trying to get to orbit. If something doesn't go as planned, they could end up in the Atlantic, so they have to be well versed at providing their own survival until we can go rescue them and pick them up. So this facility provides a great training resource for that capability as well. Okay, so we talked about getting ready to fly, so now it's time to go fly. So once the shuttle is released from the launch pad, the vehicle, the crew, and the mission's handed over to Houston. And so we have full responsibility for the rest of the mission until we get it back to the runway. The first 8.5 minutes are a little bit exciting. Try to accelerate this beast from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour, again in 8.5 minutes. Very dynamic. A couple million parts in this vehicle have to work just right. And as you can see, it's been very successful 134 times. So now the concept of mission control really hasn't changed a whole lot since the earlier days back in the 60s. They did a great job in setting this up. It's incredibly efficient and productive way to execute operations in space. Here's just a shot from the side of the room. What you see is basically approximately 17 different experts assign a subsystem on the vehicle, such as electrical, propulsion, data processing, etc. So you kind of slice the vehicle up into subsystems. Each person's responsible for their specific area. And they report to the flight director who's in the center of the room. You'll see a better picture later of that. And each of these individuals here, this is the room you'll generally see when they show mission control on TV. Each of these individuals will have at least one and sometimes many, many more people in a back room supporting them. And it takes their expertise yet to another deeper level within that subsystem. And there's a shot of some of those folks and some of their consoles that they would be working from throughout the mission. So my job as a flight director is to lead the entire team of the flight controllers and the crew to execute the mission safely, as well as try to accomplish every mission objective that we set out to do before leaving Earth. So in any complex operation, clear responsibility and chain of command is absolutely essential to be successful, and the flight director has the final say in decision-making during the actual mission. Now the flight control team, well, before I go into that, so here's a picture basically of my flight control team for the last flight of Endeavor. So it shows myself, my front room controllers, and all their back room controllers for a team photo, so you can get a feel for the size of one of the teams. And so to do this 24 hours a day for a couple weeks, we got 3 teams working about 8-hour shifts, so there'd be 2 more teams relative to this working the other 2 shifts. Now the flight control team also has access to much more depth in each of their subsystems by utilizing the mission evaluation room team. Now these are the folks that are responsible for the subsystems from the time the vehicle gets to the runway till the time it launches again. So they basically follow the vehicle for much more time than the flight controllers, because it's on the ground for months where we got in orbit for a couple weeks. And these guys have access all the way out into the suppliers and vendors, all the way down to piece parts. So they're incredibly valuable in flight when a system starts misbehaving, you get an anomaly, and they can work kind of in the background and go try to figure out what's happening on orbit and help us figure out what capability we have left for the duration of that mission. So here's a shot of some of those folks working throughout a flight in their respective control rooms and their meeting rooms. And again, they will be our resource as required, and they will ask us for help as they see fit as well. Now the next flight team member I'd like to talk about is called the mission management team. these folks, they have a daily meeting, and this is the program managers from all over the country, all the NASA centers. They get together, they talk about the mission, how it's progressing, they talk about all the anomalies, and then most importantly, they talk about whether any change in direction for the remainder of the mission is appropriate. For example, if we have a failure or a problem such that on that certain day we didn't accomplish a significant task, it may make sense to reprioritize the work left in front of us in a different way, and they may ask us to change the mission plan and work out a different plan to reprioritize everything and try to get a different set of tasks accomplished. So every once in a while they do that, and we'll go ahead and turn. We usually have plans already somewhat potted in place before they come to us because we've gotten good at predicting what they're going to ask for. But so basically we'll replan the rest of the mission within about a shift, turn it around, get their approval, and boom, we're going to re-execute the remainder of the mission based on a new plan. Now, depending on the mission, there may be teams supporting specific payloads flying on that flight. So on the last flight of Endeavour, we actually had a flagship payload that we hauled up and got installed on space station called the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer. Now, this was, again, a flagship payload, very big payload, kind of like Hubble. Very unique in that it was basically put together by 56 different institutes around 16 countries, so this is a truly international effort for this payload. So their team is quite large, but they're very excited to get to orbit. They've been working on that for about a decade. And they're up and operating and just collecting an enormous amount of information. They'll be studying that for a long, long time. So now that we accomplished the mission, it's time to bring them home, get them back to the runway, and safely to a stop. We'll go ahead and hand the vehicle back over to the ground processing folks at Kennedy Space Center, assuming we landed there, which most of the times we did. And they will take it, roll it back to the hangar, and start processing it for its next mission. Now, the ground processing team is quite large. These vehicles, despite what they were advertised to do early on, required a lot of care and feeding, a lot of hands-on work. So the ground team there at Kennedy was quite large, but it was absolutely required to get these vehicles in great shape to go fly. So as you can see, just an absolutely tremendous amount of work is required to pull off these missions, and it reached out all across the United States to get the job done, through all the NASA centers, all the suppliers, and all the vendors. And now its mission is accomplished, space station is assembled, and we just retired the shuttles here not too long ago. However, as the name implies, the International Space Station, which is in orbit and completed now, extends the program and the teamwork all the way to a global perspective now. We are obviously, ourselves and our Russian colleagues, once arch enemies, are now the two prime partners in the International Space Station. And we also have 13 other nations, including major contribution and modules from the Japanese as well as the Europeans. So we basically have 15 nations that came together, setting aside boundaries and differences to design, assemble, occupy, and conduct research on the largest and longest inhabited object ever fly in space. So the space station has been continuously occupied now for 11 years. It's currently planned to continue operation through 2020 with high expectations that it'll be extended out to at least 2028. And that's a great shot of the space station as we left it after STS-134. So again, it's only a tip of the iceberg in the team required to make these human spaceflight missions successful, but I think it clearly makes it obvious that it does take a team. So thank you.
Thanks, Gary. What's going to happen now is some people are going to move amongst you to take the questions, which we'll ask. I'll ask the questions and get a response. We're going to show you a 1-minute video while we do that process, and also to prepare our two speakers. What I'm going to ask them as soon as we come back is the question, what's the most important lesson? You know, in a sentence, what's the most important lesson that we can take away from your two perspectives, and then we'll go into the questions. All right, so I'll ask each of the presenters just to give us a few quick words on what you think the most important lesson is, and then we'll go to the questions. So, Mike.
I teach a class on history of the space age and give a lot of public talks. Students don't tend to ask why go to space, but the public does. And I really never had a good answer for it. I had to confront it myself, and the answer I've come up with is, why go to space? Because we do it well. We do it really well, especially as Americans. And a perspective I gained from research in history comes right out of the pioneers and the political actors and the scientists involved. They tended to compare the space effort, us human beings and Americans doing what we do best, to us human beings at our worst. Hermann Oberth, the rocket pioneer, in his classic work, Ways to Spaceflight of 1929, decried the World War I, and the havoc it created in Europe, and Europe's addictions, right, to smoking and to drinking. If we could only give up war and addiction, we could fund a space effort, he claimed in 1929. Lyndon Baines Johnson in the 1960s inherited something of the Vietnam War. He helped fund the Vietnam War effort in 1969, which cost about $26 billion, the same cost as all of Apollo. He also argued to Americans, having inherited Kennedy's moon program, all I'm asking for is about 50 cents a week of your taxpayer money to finish funding Apollo. And he legitimized it by saying, it's less than what we spend on smoking and drinking. Joseph Shklovsky, the Soviet astrophysicist, complained about the Soviet contributions to the Cold War, its militarization efforts, and lightheartedly argue the Soviets didn't make it to the moon because of 5 billion vodka bottles. Right? In the present, we spend about, well, we've spent nearly $1 trillion on our wars in the Middle East, haven't we? I don't want to open that question. I'd rather keep peace in the hall. But we do spend about $90 billion on alcohol. For the sake of argument, let's not give up alcohol. We spend about $40 billion on tobacco. It would take only one of our addictions to fund a mission to Mars, for example.
Okay. Gary.
Well, first I'll say you just made me thirsty. Hang on. Okay, I got a couple comments. They're fairly succinct. But human space, I guess on his last comment though, just to put in perspective, you know, our budget this past year I think was about $17.9 billion. So if you want to kind of map things in perspective. And the shuttle program was spending about $3 billion of that. So human space exploration is complex, it's hard, and it's risky. But I believe it's absolutely critical for us to continue that journey. You heard JFK's famous moon speech clip earlier, but they always leave out the rest of that statement, which I think is very applicable. So of course the famous part is, we choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade, do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they are hard. But they always leave out the part that, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one we're willing to accept, one we're unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and the others too. Because the goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energy and skills. To me, that's exactly what we do in human spaceflight. But we do need consistent leadership, continued and consistent leadership from the top to be successful. And I believe it's critical for us to remain the leader, the global leader in human spaceflight. So we just absolutely must continue to explore. Thank you.
All right, so I have some questions here. I'm going to try and stay away from the more political ones, but a couple were actually answered. Somebody asked about the Soviets and why they didn't go to the moon, and we kind of got an answer to that in terms of going to the Mars project. We got some idea in terms of budgets. So I'll ask one here of Gary. How do you keep a cool head when things go wrong?
You hide it very well. You know, one thing, it's hard to express it in 12 minutes or less, but those integrated simulations that the training team puts us through. They put in these malfunctions, and basically they take the spacecraft down to its last absolute leg before you're going to kill the crew. And you go through that, you know, I've been doing that for years, and you get trained to be able to handle these ridiculous scenarios such that when you get into the real flight and you have generally minor problems, except for a few unfortunate bad days in space we've had, and you're actually just programmed. You're focused, you're so focused on the job that you're actually programmed, and you're really not thinking about this. You're so focused with your team and how you're going to attack the problem and how you're going to keep the crew alive that it's just ingrained in you from the training. So I think after the fact, when you step away from mission control and you have a chance to look back on it, that's when you realize what a bad day you might have had. So the training is key.
All right, I've got a question for Michael about, you mentioned the dog, Leica. When did the first living thing go into space, and what was it? And then what about subsequent mammals? Curious question.
Mammals. I've looked for that answer and haven't found a definitive one. But mice, turtles in the early years went up on V2 rockets to the edge of space. Fruit flies were actually the first to get to the edge of space in these stratospheric balloons in the 1930s, and also on the V2, just to the edge of space. And of course, the Soviets preferred dogs. We preferred chimpanzees. That's an interesting story in itself. Korolev, actually, who you saw in the clip and I discussed, I had the choice to make whether to get, purebred, top-notch dogs to send into space. But he decided no, they'd be too nervous, too high pedigree. He picked the mutts that were out in Baikonur Churatam in the middle of Central Asia because they were gritty, hardy dogs. They were beloved by all, in the program, and who ensured that they, as best they could, to bring them back alive. That's the best answer I could give you. It's still an open area for research. So.
Okay, so there's one here for Gary. You talked a lot about the technical side. What about the human side? And two parts to the question. One is, what goes through your mind during liftoff and landing, and how well do you know the astronauts?
Let me take part two first. We live next door to astronauts. Their kids go to our schools. And in pre-flight training, like you said, we spend about a year together intimately working on getting this specific mission right. We get very, very close to the crew. They're our friends, they're our neighbors, so very, very close to some of them. And the other part, so on launch day, what are you thinking? You're torn between the excitement the crew's going through with that ride that they're heading up to orbit in that 8.5 minutes, being accelerated to 17,500 miles an hour. Most of them have been fighter pilots. They know all about speed, and they look forward to that. They understand the risk, but they definitely look forward to that. So part of you is sharing that experience, even though you're watching it from the ground. You're sharing that with them, but you're also realizing that, again, about 1 million of these parts of this vehicle have to keep working right, and it's a little bit scary for that 8.5 minutes. The return trip's not quite the same. You do have to slow down from 17,000 to 0, and there's a very, very dangerous section of that time frame where you're generating a lot of heat on the vehicle, and we had one bad day in space in that region as well. So you're very, very concerned about them, but you're also, part of you is sharing that experience with them as well, because you know how hard you worked to make it happen.
Thanks. So one for Mike. So we were involved back in '61 in the space race against the Soviet Union. Are we now in a space race with China? And what's your perspective on?
Not anymore. President George Bush Jr. Did launch a kind of competition with Chinese prospects to go to the moon, back with his own Bush initiative in 2004. President Obama scaled that back in recent years, although he seems to have have started reviving parts of it without the moon as an object and without the Chinese as a new kind of rival. So we're in this kind of interesting pause in space programs. It's hard to follow the news where exactly presidential, congressional, NASA leaders agree. The Chinese, though, keep very concerted, focused efforts to preparing a way for their own space station. Sadly, though, it's outside of, still, these fascinating international efforts that Gary talked about that are really thrilling and, again, represent the best of us.
Okay. I'll do one final question with Gary. This is from a student asking, what can I do to set myself apart from others applying for positions at NASA? And while you think about the answer, one thing that struck me walking through the control center was you walk around and they hear you from Purdue, and then all these Boilermakers sort of pop up and one at a time. I'm serious. I don't think it was staged. No. But so given this history, given the history of the likes of Gus Grissom, the first Purdue grad to be in space, and through to Gary and others involved in parts of the team, what's the trick for getting into this line of work?
I think the best answer I can give you for that is not to focus specifically on being an astronaut or getting in the space program. Find what you want to do, that you love to do it well. You've seen over the evolution of space flight, we've gone from fighter pilots only to now we have all walks of life being astronauts, mission specialists. We need people that can are handy in the garage. They have to keep space station. You're working on space station all the time. So you're seeing a whole change in requirements, if you will, from strictly fighter pilots or hardcore engineers to the whole spectrum of capabilities. So I would just tell you, find out figure out what you really love to do, and just go do it very, very well. And when you market that, as you apply for these positions, you market that, and that's what they look for. That's very important. So don't shortchange yourself trying to get to one goal and end up there not being exactly what you love to do. Make sure it's something you love to do.
Follow your passions. So I want to draw this part of the event to a close. I want to thank Mike Smith from History and Gary Horlacher from NASA for their contributions. If you'd join me and as I give them these gifts, if you applaud for their contributions.
Thank you very much.
I also want to thank all of you for coming out today. I hope it's been enjoyable to be part of this inaugural event. And one group I didn't mention, I meant to earlier on, was members of our Advisory Council, Industrial Advisory Council, are in the front row here, so I just want to acknowledge them. But I also want to thank the people behind the scenes, so it's the team behind the team behind the team, particularly Lisa and Julie and Becky, who are over there now doing some work, and Cindy. So thank you for coming. There's some light refreshments over there. You can continue the discussion. And again, thank you for coming.